Welcome to Next Round with me, Dáil McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round. Today, are we heading for a general election? That's a question on our minds today, and with Sinn Féin in crisis, losing two TDs in recent weeks on the back of a strong budget by the government as well, and people already out canvassing, you'd swear that an election has already been called. So is Ireland about to be plunged into a general election? We'll start with that. Self-driving cars and transit. What was once science fiction is now very real and in the present. We look at the progress coming out of California with everything with respect to self-driving cars. And the UK hosted a record-breaking international investment summit recently, securing over £63 billion in investment commitments from global businesses. Is our lunch being eaten by Britain? If you do like this podcast, please like, share and subscribe to it. We're available on all major podcast platforms. You can also view us and watch us on our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to us there as well. David, good to see you. And I think we want to start with a bit of speculation on is Ireland about to be plunged into a general election? And of course, this is on the back of the omni-shambles, to borrow that word from the various scandals which have hit Sinn Féin in recent weeks. As I mentioned at the start, they're losing two TDs, a number of party officials having to resign over a series of scandals within the organisation. And of course, that's on the back of a bumper budget, record spending by the government. And Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach and Minister for Foreign Affairs, was on the Inside Politics podcast by our friends and colleagues in the Irish Times. And in the interview, he had a pretty in-depth discussion on where he saw things going. But crucially, he opened the door for an election to be on this side of Christmas, noting that once key legislation was passed around the finance bill, the planning bill, which has been going through the Oireachtas for the last 2 years, and also the social welfare bill, were critical elements for him to get passed. He noted as well, of course, that the mental health bill, which is something which he has been a passionate supporter of, he ideally wants to get it through, but I noticed in his answer that he was okay with it not making it to the final furlong. But it seems like we're all systems go for an election in the next few weeks.
It does seem to be that, yeah. And what was telling in those comments by Micheál Martin is that he didn't list a further set of policies that he'd like to get done, right, which would fill the time through December, Jan and Feb, right? And he was accepting the point that the difference between a November-December election and a Jan-Feb election is relatively small in the time that you have left legislatively. So because some of these bills have progressed faster than expected, and the last one, well, not the last one, but the main one being the finance and social welfare, that one is not yet kind of in progress to a big degree. That might mean that we're still, maybe a week or two from this thing happening, but it feels like we're very much on for it. Feels very much on for it.
Yeah, and one of the pieces which was called out by Pat Leahy and Hugh Linehan was the how Fine Gael once bitten, twice shy with respect to a February election for Fine Gael, and how there's probably a big movement within the party now to go for an election in November. And looking at more recent history, it hasn't served the party well. The last two elections that have happened in February, and November seems to be the best one. I noted, David, from Micheál Martin, first of all, I think he actually came across very well. And he seemed very comfortable with, I think, both defending the history of the government, but also noting, I think, I'm not sure if you noticed on housing in particular, he accepted that progress needs to ramp up, noting that at the end of this year, about 40,000 commencements for dwellings will be the case. But he said the aim is they want to get it to 60,000 homes per year, which is actually the first time. It's actually beating Fine Gael on Fine Gael's commitment of 50,000. But it's something that we've covered on this podcast, David, which is that this ambition and this need for really getting the supply side of housing right. It sounds like Micheál Martin actually is moving more to our way of thinking than perhaps the Fine Gael side is even.
Well, what I think Fianna Fáil has to do is play a little bit of catch up here, because Simon Harris has been out to say we want 250,000 homes by the end of the next Dáil term. Sinn Féin say 300,000. And now Micheál Martin has to come up effectively with a number. But, crucially, what Fianna Fáil have is they have the housing ministry, and they've had it for this full Dáil term. And what Micheál Martin was very, I think, this is I think a good message for Fianna Fáil, is to say, look, we didn't shy from the tough ministries. We wanted housing, we wanted health, they've education as well. They have kind of gone into those difficult ministries and have gone through the difficult moments in them over this Dáil term. And where normally that might stand against an outgoing government, I think Micheál Martin is clearly trying to turn it into a selling point. I think more widely, what his interview projected was very much a sense of responsibility about what Fianna Fáil's role in the coalition has been. And crucially, this message that, you can't go for the election until you have these pieces of legislation done, that's going to be a message that can continue into the election campaign. He can say, look, we didn't want to do this recklessly, kind of paint that picture against Simon Harris. It may even create a kind of I'm the responsible minister, the guy who's been there for more than a generation now, a cabinet, whereas this late 30s guy, the TikTok guy, can you trust him? I mean, that may not be the sharpness of language that comes out from Micheál Martin. It's inferred. Yeah. And I think whilst none of that has been said, I want to be clear, none of that has been, come out. He's never contrasted himself against the Taoiseach, but he has to create that kind of perception. And I think that route of being the kind of the steady hand came across quite well from his part.
Yeah, it's something. One of the points I've been making, David, recently, and by people who've been asking me, when's the election going to be? What are your thoughts? I always felt that in reality, this was really Micheál Martin's call as to when this is going to happen. I know constitutionally the Taoiseach is the person who has the prerogative and gets to decide that. But I think, end of the day, this is a government that is going to the electorate to be re-elected, at least with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And doing that requires a harmonious exit from government together, stepping off the stage together, almost hand in hand in many ways. And I think if there was any intention to exit government in a non-organized fashion, I don't think that would have played well. And I think really, in reality, you need Micheál Martin to agree to an election this side of Christmas. And I think this is his big signal now that, what's the difference between end of November, start of December, and February? There's really none once the key piece of work get completed. And also, of course, it's good timing with the Sinn Féin crisis.
Yeah. So I think that Micheál Martin is crucial. I differ slightly with you in that you're having the general election with his consent so that you can get a good coalition out of it the next time. I think you could go to the Oros tomorrow, still have the election, burn some bridges, but then rebuild them. Because if Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, maybe plus Independence is the only game in town, those parties are just going to come back together and they'll kiss and make up after a bit of a burnt bridge. But what's more important about Micheál Martin's role is that he's kind of giving a vocal voice to these other pieces of legislation. And if Simon Harris doesn't kind of acknowledge that, then that's a narrative that's going to hurt him in the general election. You didn't get the finance bill through, you didn't get a mental health bill through. come on, like, you're actually not responsible people of government, but Fianna Fáil is, will be his argument. So I think I kind of agree with you, but just different angle on
I
it.
think you disagree with me, and that's fine. That's
okay.
fine. That's fine, David. You can disagree all you want.
Yeah.
But no, but I see your point, but I think ultimately, like, this is all about relationships, and I think what could happen if it ended in an acrimonious way? Well, I think you're right. It could affect how the election plays out, who is the responsible party of government, who actually wants to get the work done versus who just wants to almost game the election before it even happens. And then that might, of course, inflate Fianna Fáil support over Fine Gael's. But I also think then, one of the negative effects could be a protracted negotiation period where actually you won't have a government pretty much agreed right afterwards. It might be a case of, well, you've broken trust between how we operate. We need to now fundamentally renegotiate everything all over again. And we might need crystal guarantees on key Fianna Fáil priorities, which perhaps beforehand they might have been really willing to compromise on. So I think it actually would have been a pretty negative for what has been a real success, actually. I think seeing this government go the distance for the last 4.5 years. I think for it to have ended in a situation that was, not organized and not almost together, again at the final furlong, I think actually would have been unfortunate. Yeah.
Look, it would have hurt some negotiation aspects that end up, emerging out of the ashes of this election whenever it's held. I mean, certainly what I think is now on the cards is that because the relationship is strong, it might be, as you say, walking off together, and an election before Christmas. We may actually have a government before Christmas.
You've said this,
which
right,
I wouldn't. Yeah, and I would have always said it's going to take months, possibly the longest ever coalition negotiation period. We still might have a situation where Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil don't have a majority between them. I think that during election campaign that's very possible. Mm-hmm. But with the such broad number of independents that are running now, I think you're going to have enough numbers between that wing of the Dáil to be able to get something together more quickly. Because you don't, in the case of the Green Party, you had to go to the membership of the Greens, for example, and you will still have to go to the membership of Fine Gael and
it's more certain. But I think the recommendation by the leaders carries a bit more weight, I think.
Yes, that is certainly the case. Now, actually, I've almost kind of, in a way, contradicted myself here in that because you still need to go to the two big parties, you may still not have something rubber stamped by Christmas. But what we may be able to at least say is we have the text of the programme for government by Christmas. Something like that could be a little more possible.
Or maybe these parties might revolutionize how they do these processes and use tech perhaps to get a quick, maybe you can text to vote 1 for yes, 2 for no, and if you agree for a programme for government. But speaking of tech, David, let's shift gears, I think, to what we want to talk about, which is on self-driving cars. So the self-driving car industry is, of course, at the forefront of technological innovation, where it's revolutionizing how we think about transportation. Autonomous vehicles, or AVs, really have the potential to not only transform personal mobility, but things like logistics, public transit, and even urban planning. The major players are companies like Tesla, Waymo is another one you will have heard, and Cruise, and they've all been really pushing the boundaries around artificial intelligence, sensor technology, and machine learning. It is estimated that the global market for autonomous vehicles will exceed $2 trillion by 2030. And it's clear that this is going to become a critical industry for us all in the coming years. However, challenges are facing it, of course: regulatory hurdles, public trust, and complexities ensuring safety in unpredictable conditions are all important as well. Some quick data points here, David. In 2023, Waymo surpassed 10 million miles of autonomous driving. Tesla's autopilot system is one of the most widely used, although it is still classified as a level 2, which means partial automation system. The industry is expected to grow by over 40% over the next decade. And fully autonomous vehicles, which is level 5 in the category rating, are not yet commercially available, but could be within the decade.
Yeah, it's a really exciting world, and the reason I raise this topic is because every year or two I tend to delve back into this world. So I've done it now for the past couple of years. I just check in on what the different companies are doing, where the technology is. Are we any closer to level 5? And I suppose the last time I did this was kind of around the year 22, where driverless cars had hit a bit of a speed bump, so to speak. A lot of companies began cutting their funding into these divisions within them. And why did they do that? Interest rates had started to go up, tech stocks were falling, and a lot of cutbacks came along within the tech world. And the first thing you're going to cut is a totally new innovative section of your business that is spending a lot of money but isn't actually earning any revenue yet. The only company that's earning any revenue from their work is Waymo, and that's Google or Alphabet's division. But theirs is now at a much more established point. They are on the road in 4 US cities. They're in parts of San Francisco, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Austin. And they started, I believe it was in Phoenix, because Phoenix is one of these cities that has mostly flat surfaces, has mostly a grid system, and that allows for much more simplified turning and overtaking and all the other maneuvers that a car has to do. So you're starting easy. Like, I mean, if you started in Rome or in Dublin, like, you just wouldn't be able to navigate the full...
It's hard enough for a human to figure it out, David.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so windy turns and one-way streets and all that kind of stuff. So they're starting simple, but they have, despite some cutbacks, like the likes of Waymo have been able to expand. It looks like the number of errors that these cars are making continues to decline, and the number of cases where a human needs to take over. So in the case of Waymo, there is always a kind of a control center where at any time a passenger can alert that center to take over the car and get them around a difficult obstacle or something that they cannot pass. That could be roadworks that are unforeseen and are not well signposted. It could be a car crash in front of your way. It could have been a change in something that just wasn't already adopted by the computer. So the technology is getting better. It's learning. And I might just mention then what Tesla are doing. So Tesla only in the past week had an announcement around the concept of robo-taxis. Now, investors were a little underwhelmed by this, but I think the technology in the broadest sense is very clever. Tesla has cars on the road around the world, and the cars have in them the technology to self-drive. Now, that technology is not at the point of being licensed or ready to be doing this kind of stuff on its own. But the time will come where Tesla believes it can activate your Tesla to be a taxi, a robo-taxi. And what does that mean? You drive your Tesla car during the day, but at nighttime, you give it a set window of time where the car will drive itself out of the drive, go around a city, pick up passengers, and do a taxi service, and then return your car back to the driveway by the end of the night. Now, wouldn't that be something?
Wild. I think so a few things here. First of all, I think the possible supplementary income stream where if you think about a car, right? You buy a car, depreciating,
ain't cheap.
Ain't cheap. Depreciating asset. You buy a brand new car, loses 20% of its value, and you drive it off a lot. But this actually has, from the economic standpoint, it's actually has a chance to be a bit of a game changer in terms of how it can become a revenue generating asset for you, which previously, you just sunk your cost into it. And I think that the tech on this really has been incredible over the last number of months and years. In preparation for this, David, I know we were going to talk about this, and you'd shared with me a podcast where people were giving their reactions on using Waymo recently, and this is basically, for the context of listeners and viewers, Dreamforce, Salesforce's annual sales conference in San Francisco happened recently, and the person gave the example where Waymos were all over the streets of San Francisco. And the person who used it said that it was a 5-star experience, that they could not believe how well it performed. And compared to ordering an Uber driven by a person and a Waymo, first of all, the Waymo was a few dollars cheaper, which I don't know what that means then for jobs, but would flag that there. And the entire experience from pulling up to travel, you're on your phone. So on your phone, you select, when to open the door. You select when to start driving. Very pleasant music playing as you get in. That's very soft. And then you start and you go. And on the drive, relatively, flawless. Did note that there were some other colleagues of his who had used Waymos as well in San Francisco. That, for example, there was one time when there was a stop sign that was obscured by a tree, which I found it hard to navigate. But we're getting there, I think, is the key point, compared to, when people started using self-driving Ubers back in 2018. There was so many reports of nearly killing, of people actually dying as well, right? And crashes and incidences. But we're really at the stage now where this technology is very real, very good, is directly competing with human capital for work, and in many ways doing a better job.
For sure. For sure. Just to say on the Uber point, Uber were one of the companies that basically ditched their whole self-driving division. And what Uber are now pitching themselves as being is that they will be the app that you use effectively to order your driverless car. That because they have good data on the journeys people take because of human Ubers, that they can help the driverless car world better be smart. Yeah, like just to make sure, like how many cars do you need on road in the evening time versus in the morning time, which parts of the city you need to be in, that sort of thing. That type of data can become incredibly useful, and they hope to kind of leverage that in line, and they'll still have their human Ubers on the road. But just thinking really forward about this, it's made me think a lot about where the likes of transport infrastructure is going to go, because we had Sean Keyes right on last week, and the big idea there is really scaling up the likes of Transport Infrastructure Ireland. If you have autonomous vehicles on the road, do you also need to still build metro lines? And I think the answer to that, certainly for like the metro to Dublin Airport, is yes, you still do, because a city like ours has just been way behind on them. But I think we may find that we can much more efficiently use the road space that we've built over 2 centuries in the Western world to maximize that, and actually take people out of individual cars. That could be a major point of policy, as opposed to these other options.
So are you saying, David, that we almost need to really focus on kind of utilizing autonomous vehicles as a possible transport solution going forward?
I think so. Yeah. I think you're going to what you're going to end up doing is you'll probably have the autonomous tech in the existing set of vehicles that are out there, right? So the cars that people drive to work and to school will become autonomous. The buses that people use to get in their existing routes will go autonomous, yes. And then trucks, freight, that kind of stuff will all go autonomous.
Well,
and that would,
And my quick reaction to that is think of industrial disputes as this technology is starting to be deployed. How many million truck drivers are there in the US? Is it 3 million?
About 3.
3 million come to mind. Think of all of the public transit drivers, and I know, like for example, on like many undergrounds across the world and subways, there are autonomous carriages, but in many there's not, and there's a reason for that, because they've been unionized.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a major hurdle for it, for sure. What I think Elon Musk and Tesla are saying is that, look, instead of being a taxi driver, you can be the manager for a fleet of driverless taxis, and you will still have to be on a computer ready to take over in a situation and steer your car out of trouble. That sort of situation that may well be a continual involvement of of labor
Yeah,
for sure.
like so I get that point, and I think it's a nice retort to the point.
Mm,
But it's also not credible on a few fronts, in the sense that like the reality is this will displace a lot of jobs. And that's a
yeah,
fact. And the tech is coming. And I think the challenge here now is, one, it has to be accepted because it will be adopted. I think
yeah,
government now needs to get a real handle on what are we going to do now to transition these, 3 million truckers in the US, all these other people who, need to be reskilled for alternative jobs in a newer and more modern economy. Because I think we can say, oh, it won't replace the jobs, and oh, you can be the manager. You'll have one manager for 1,000 taxis. It won't be one manager for one taxi, right? So like it's going to displace jobs, and it's going to. But I think the key point is, my worry about all of this is not the tech, it's the pace of change. And I think
mm.
government has to kind of get started now, I think, on thinking about how can we adopt this at the pace that it's coming at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really worthy for governments to have, is to have a clear plan of how these things will transition. When people talk about climate, you talk about just transition. When people talk about technological change, like when computers came along, it was about making sure that people's employment is protected, but not particular tasks and roles are
Yeah.
protected. So that kind of policy approach, I think, is one that's going to be worthy to come along. Just thinking of something like buses, though, if you go driverless on the buses, you may still have a person in, it may have not a driver, but someone to monitor the bus for safety, to open doors and close them, to make sure that people's tickets are still being tapped, that kind of stuff. So I
Good
think there
point.
will
Yeah.
be there will be reasons for humans to be involved, and this is over multiple decades. I think this change will come in, but I do think about the end point, for example, of getting certain parts of city centres to be autonomous only zones, right? So if you could have that, you could basically remove all the road signs and and maybe all the traffic lights. You probably still have them for pedestrians, so you probably still have lights somewhere, but you could really clean up the urban centres by making things
That's a
more
great
efficient.
point.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I think it goes back to when we had Derek
I
Cassidy
know.
on, and he was
I
talking.
went right
Yeah,
there.
and he was talking. Yeah, yeah, we got to meet Derek during the week, of course,
Yeah.
and these issues come up when we meet these people in person as well. It's like Dublin sometimes is a bit of a kip, and it'd be great if and we were actually just talking about this, Dale, to say as well that we were talking about road signs and some of the most useless road signs in
Oh
Dublin,
yeah.
and that there should be an award ceremony for
There
them,
should.
and so much of that would be are the signs for drivers,
Yeah.
and it's all about
Yeah,
driver
yeah,
decisions.
it's driver, and it's like, don't turn left here, turn right here, but only at this time. And it got like there's like a sign for a sign almost at times. But no, like, I think it's a really interesting topic, and it is quite amazing to see the progress that's happening on this front. I know this isn't directly related, but I mean, we all saw the video of SpaceX catching um,
The
the
booster.
booster. Like, I don't think anyone thought that that was possible in at least in this decade. And look at it happening. And so
Yeah.
we really are at the forefront of some amazing engineering and some fantastic technology. Um, but it will have an effect on our economies, and humans are going to be directly impacted positively and negatively as a result of it. And I think my fear, David, is I just don't think we're actually thinking as far ahead as like this is on the ground in 4 cities in the US now, directly competing with human capital. Um, and
Yeah.
I don't think this conversation has even reared its head in Ireland yet.
No, no, and it won't initially, and that's because we're not at the coal face of it. I do hope though that Dublin and Ireland could be one of the first European cities to get these cars on the
Yeah.
road, and that's something that I haven't seen any politician or many people at all talking about. I'd love to know, are there even any plans afoot to maybe give some limited licensed space for this kind of tech to get on Irish roads, for Dublin or other cities to be a good test center for some more difficult terrain.
Yeah.
I think Ireland should really show leadership here in trying to get some of that activity going.
Well, if they want a real test, I think the wavy roads of Dublin are a good way to go. Just on this, actually, because I had a few people who I know were in California quite recently, and actually this was a topic of conversation we were having. Like self-driving cars is one element, but you also have delivery as well. So like you're able to send, if you want to order, I don't know, some like takeaway food or snacks, or whatever. What we're used to is the delivery rider or driver coming up to our homes and giving us the bag and taking the photo and doing the code, etc. In the US, what you have is you'll have these kind of robot car things. They'll pull up. You on the app, you press unlock, you take it out, you take a photograph of the item, and you close it, and it goes on its way. So we see cities now full of delivery drivers and all of that. That is a job that I think is rife for ripe for a disruption by this.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I think some of that human capital will then be spent monitoring these devices as they go off and deliver food or other items to people. There'll still be human involvement, things like sort centers and all of that. That, for example, taking of Amazon, they've gone highly automated, but they still have a lot of human involvement as well. So there are ways to kind of pair the kind of robotic and automated tech with humans. But yeah, it's going to revolutionize how consumers deal with this kind of stuff as well. Suddenly getting things delivered, food or instant stuff becomes just much more attainable for people.
It does. It's fascinating stuff. And, I think if we shift gears again, we're talking about innovation and the chance for Ireland to be at the forefront of big items such as that's happening in the US. To our right-hand side, the UK hosted a record-breaking international investment summit, securing over £63 billion of investment commitments from major global businesses. The summit focused on sectors such as AI, clean energy, advanced manufacturing, and will create over 38,000 jobs across the UK. Key deals that were announced included Blackstone, £10 billion investment to build one of Europe's largest AI data centers in Northumberland. Amazon Web Services investing over $8 billion. Octopus Energy investing over $2 billion to renewable energy projects. And really this event, I think, highlighted the UK's ambition to remain a global leader in the technology space, but focusing on those key areas of innovation and AI infrastructure. And of course, this is part of the broader new UK government's agenda, which is to go for growth in sectors where they believe that the UK has that competitive advantage against other economies, such as in the areas of clean tech and other digital technologies. Now, of course, this is a backdrop to what is going to be a difficult budget in the UK coming forward, which may introduce new policies that will affect and increase the cost of business, of doing business for businesses. But these investments, the £63 billion investment, is seen as critical to boosting growth for the country and stabilizing these key industries. Now, why am I raising this? Because there was a good article in the Business Post this week by Ian Geider. And the point he was making, which is about, why is this important to us and why should we be even thinking about it? And really it's about, how Ireland is winning business, but also the risks for Ireland winning business going forward. And, one thing he noted was that what's whispered behind closed doors is the view that, and especially in boardrooms, is that Ireland, the view is that Ireland is just not as competitive as it used to be, and that there are other destinations that are aggressively trying to be attractive and open. And the big question is, what if our biggest competitor actually is the UK again? And it's not just a single issue. It's wider problems that we've spoken about on this podcast, David, from infrastructure to finding workers to finding housing, and also the cost of doing business here. And our policymakers slow to respond. So my question here, David, is Britain eating our lunch on attracting international investment?
It's great to see this issue being on people's radars, because Ireland's kind of strong position we've had in the FDI kind of can't continue forever. But going back to what Micheál Martin said to that podcast that we talked about, he was asked about infrastructure and FDI, and he kind of gave a response which almost said that the infrastructure pressures that we have are almost because of FDI, as opposed to being thought of as a hindrance to more FDI, that because you have a lot of jobs here, that's putting pressure on public transport, on the electricity system with data centers and on all that kind of stuff. And I actually do a little more subscribe to that view. I mean, it's a good kick up the opposite side to be able to say to governments, look, we actually need to keep delivering more, and that's quite good and proper. The question of the UK, though, is, as you asked me, I would have said that the UK was a big threat to us about a decade ago, because the UK was within the European Union. Cameron was talking about, and Osborne, they were considering cutting corporate tax. They were trying to put that on a downward trajectory. And then it was Theresa May and Boris Johnson years, you ended up with it on an upward trajectory. Of course, Northern Ireland has gone off and has been allowed to do 12.5% as well. And also at that time, about a decade ago, you had quite a free-flowing availability of foreign labour to come into the UK. Foreign students, really smart talent from around the world was able to go into the UK. Now you have a situation where the trade landscape is more difficult because of Brexit. Getting people, high-tech people to go into the UK is a little tougher, although high numbers of people have continued to go to the UK, as you know, from the migration debate. And the tax landscape, because of the government's wide deficit, is probably only going to worsen in the UK as they try and fill their budget deficit, whereas in Ireland we're running quite a significant surplus. So, and the other thing about the investment stuff in the UK is that the UK is also trying, in a kind of post-Brexit thinking, to spur more domestic industry, to get more companies that are kind of British-based and go around the world, as opposed to foreign direct investment coming in. Although, as you rightly say, you've identified a whole bunch of places where they are trying that. But in the round, I would have said the UK was much more a threat a decade ago than it is now. Is that fair, or are you seeing something that might be a bigger threat to Ireland?
No, David, I'm seeing a challenge. I think big challenge for this economy, because to your point, end of the day, there is a big deficit here, and
the UK's budget deficit.
Yes, the UK's budget deficit. Yeah. Rachel Reeves, the new UK Chancellor, has to fill a gap, and as I mentioned in the opening piece there, one of the fears that's on the minds of business owners is an increase to taxes on business owners here as a way of plugging that gap. And what will that do for growth? What will that do for people who want to maintain and grow their businesses when the increase of actually having a business is going to further increase? This is a high tax economy right now, and while it's, I think it's great to see. I suppose my point here is, I think that on the fundamentals of Anglo-Irish competitiveness between each other, Ireland wins out, and it wins out on the areas of doing business. We're doing really good stuff on talent attraction as well. The fundamentals of the economy are pretty sound, and again, as you mentioned, the economy is doing well. I think, though, what I thought was great to see, though, was actually, it's less about the fundamentals of the UK economy. It was more about a bit of an innovative idea and kind of being aggressive, getting out there, trying to win business. It was almost like they're kind of in startup mode again as a country. And, Ireland has done very well on its FDI approach for the last 20 years. And, great organizations like the IDA doing fantastic work, attracting inward investment into Ireland. But something like an investment summit where you get the world's leading investment stakeholder into one room in the UK to sell Britain, I think is quite impactful. And I think but I think Ireland is primed well to do something similar. So I think I think my net point here is, I think if you're choosing like for like, I think Ireland is winning out on that, and the data shows that, by the way. But I think we have a new competitor here in the UK as well, and they're being innovative, they're thinking differently, and they're hungry. So it's something we just need to watch out for, I think, because that hunger is good for competition.
Well, that is a fair point. I mean, Ireland, I think it's fair to say, isn't as hungry now, being at full employment for a good stretch of time, having such safe coffers when it comes to corporate tax. Our risk is of things going the other way, as opposed to new stuff coming in. So that is very much a challenge for us, I think. Yeah. So I guess from that point of view, it's challenge, right? Has it come up? Because I was at a conference where I was curious about this question as well, about FDI, and I was asking to a panel of people, okay, who are these countries that are actually at risk to poaching? This was a topic of where Apple had flagged that other countries were trying to poach them away from Ireland. Have other countries come across your radar as being a risk as well?
I mean, like in terms of like attracting talent and businesses from Ireland to mainland.
Yeah.
I mean, Poland is one that's been doing very well. But again, like I think Ireland has the unique position where it's so geographically well placed between the US and Europe. It's the last English-speaking country in Europe, economically open, well educated. The likes of Poland are doing well. You have Estonia, but fundamentally, Britain's biggest challenge has been Europe, right? And again, like their whole piece around, we're going to get these trade deals, and that'll be our differentiating factor. They haven't done it. They still haven't negotiated a successful trade deal with Canada. They still haven't negotiated it with the US. There was an opportunity there for it to be a success, but they just aren't succeeding.
Yeah, and the UK was also at one point talking about making the City of London kind of like a Singapore of Europe,
right,
where you'd have kind of low regulatory environment in financial services. And that kind of stuff never really came along. Now, what happened on financial services is much fewer firms left London than was expected. And the big winners of that, it was said, would be the likes of Paris, Amsterdam, maybe the likes of Milan, Madrid as well. But very little of that materialized. And I think it does speak to how being in the English-speaking world and having a big cluster of companies together in the likes of London or Dublin is where companies kind of tend to veer their attention.
Yeah.
A country I should also speak about as well is Portugal.
Yeah.
Now, Portugal isn't so much on the financial services side, but on the computer programming and tech side, Portugal has stormed ahead in the past decade. They have tripled the number of people who work in computer programming, and they've done it by attracting very much kind of programming that's more on the lower side. When I say lower side, I mean kind of less innovative, a little more a bit of call center in there as well. So you don't need as high an education level. But because Portugal has a really high share of people who have English language as well as their native Portuguese, that's been a real draw for that country as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating times, David, and there's lots on the go. But I think with that, we are out of time. So with that, again, thank you everyone for watching and listening. Again, if you did like this podcast, please Please like it, please share it, and please subscribe to it. Again, we're available on all major podcasting platforms and also on YouTube, where you can watch and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Great to see you again this week, David. Look forward to chatting again next week. Take care and bye for now.